Hello, folks. It is Thursday, September 14. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the East Coast of the United States. We're going to do an update on the gold markets. We'll be looking at some charts. Before we get to the charts, I want to share my thoughts on the big picture for gold. And truly, the big picture is more interesting at this point than the charts. You know, the day-to-day bouncing back and forth in price. It's the big picture that is significant when we start talking about precious metals at this point in history. So the West has controlled the price of gold for a long time. You know, if you look back in history, one of the obvious things you can research is the London gold pool. That was from 1968. I forget the exact year that it failed, but it was an obvious intentional effort to control the price of gold, and it failed. And of course, that's the good news for fans of honest money, is that all of these manipulation schemes, attempts to control the price of gold, they ultimately fail. And again, that's good news for us, the fans of honest money. Now, some of the aspects of the big picture of gold can be challenging for us to believe or really, grok or wrap our minds around as Westerners. And part of the challenge, the reason it's a challenge for us to believe some of the big picture right now is that, well, we're Westerners, we're Americans, and we've been inculcated from birth with this idea of American exceptionalism. That somehow, simply because we're born American, that we're exceptional human beings. Well, that it's just not the case. We're all human beings living here on planet Earth. None of us are exceptional. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which continent you're born on, which country you're born in. Your place of birth does not make you exceptional. And then here in quotes, that's just the belief that the United States is somehow exceptional to the rest of the world. And it's simply not true. But because we believe that, it makes us hard for us to believe anything that doesn't support that idea or goes against that idea. And so, this idea of American exceptionalism, is it fact, fiction, or just a narrative? Now, there's an idea, is that an interesting idea, that American exceptionalism is simply a narrative. Now, let's talk about some facts. So, after World War II, the United States was actually exceptional in some aspects. So, the key one, in my mind, is that we were the only global power that didn't get blown to bitsies in the war, and we didn't lose millions of people. I think we lost 310,000 people, something like that. It's significant, obviously, traumatic to lose that many human beings out of your population. But compare that to the Russians. They lost somewhere between 27 and 39 million people during World War II. And so, 27 million versus 310,000, they don't really compare. And so anyway, from that perspective, we came out of World War II as an exceptional country. We didn't get blown up. We didn't lose a significant portion of our population. And we had significant industrial output. We had converted to support the war effort. We had our industrial capacity was cranking coming out of the war, and it needed some new outlet. We were done with war production, and so all of that capability was available for other uses. And then another unique thing or exceptional thing about the United States coming out of World War II is that we were on the gold standard, and the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 had basically set the whole world, most of the world, on the gold standard. Because the Bretton Woods Agreement, if you're not familiar with it, it said that the world would use the US dollar, and the US dollar was tied to gold. So any country that chose to tie their own currency, their own economy, to the US dollar was in essence on the gold standard. And so, these factors, those are facts. Again, this Brian stating his opinion, these were facts. America coming out of World War II had some exceptional aspects. Now, there were other aspects of the idea of American exceptionalism that were just myths or narrative, in my opinion. The idea that we were morally superior. No, that's BS. There's nothing morally superior about Americans. Now, perhaps a larger percentage of our population is religious or claims to be religious, Sunday Christians, that they're the ones that they're sitting in the pew next to you on Sunday, and then they flip you off on their way out of the parking lot because you got in front of them. But anyway, we don't need to go into religion. Again, the American exceptionalism, the myth that somehow we were uniquely virtuous. No, there's nothing uniquely virtuous about Americans. Indispensable nation? I don't think so. Shining city on the hill? These two in quotes, these are some of the common ideas that proponents or supporters of the myth, the narrative of American exceptionalism, these were ideas that they proposed, they supported in their writings, that America was the indispensable nation, we were the shining city on the hill. And then this is the big one, and the most dangerous, in my opinion, to the rest of the world, is that somehow America, because of its moral superiority, its virtuosity, the indispensable nation, etc., that we were obligated to lead the free world towards democracy. And kind of a tangential thought, I wonder how many million human beings have been killed in the process of America leading the free world towards democracy. But anyway, we don't want to go there right now. So let's continue. So one of the books that I'm reading right now is The Great Reset. The subtitle is And the War for the World. It was written by Alex Jones in 2021. So it's a recent book, covers current themes, current events. Obviously, the COOF is one of the things covered in the book. Talks a lot about Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and then this writer, Yuval Harari, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And then this particular quote comes from his book. Yuval has several books, at least 4. Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And so he's talking about basically narrative, and he's saying that, and of course he's speaking from the perspective of world leaders. There's this group of people, and I suspect that if you got them into the laboratory, they would all be clinically diagnosable as either psychopaths or sociopaths, that, basically they see themselves as superior human beings to you and I, that somehow they're better than we are. But anyway, so Yuval is speaking from the perspective of this elite class of human beings, as they perceive themselves, and what they need to do to control the rest of us, us plebes. And so that's what's here in the quote. Educate people constantly from the moment they are born. And that gets back to, as I see it, one of the challenges we face as Americans, Westerners, is that we have been inculcated from birth with this idea that we are somehow superior. And, it's just not true. It's a narrative, it's a myth. But anyway, let's continue with Yuval. The imagined order. And so what Yuval is getting at here is that basically the elite need to present the plebes with a narrative to guide their lives. And that's what he's talking about, this imagined order. And so that's what we as Americans have received from birth, is this idea of American exceptionalism. And then he's saying that this narrative gets incorporated into anything and everything, fairy tales, dramas, etc. I'm 60 years old. In elementary school, we stood up at the start of every day. We faced the American flag. We put our hands over our hearts, and we pledged allegiance to the American flag. So that's the America that I grew up with, and even today, the American concepts are so deeply ingrained in me that when I hear our national anthem, I get a lump in my throat. So I'm a deeply patriotic American, but I believe that we have to recognize that American exceptionalism, it's a myth, it's a narrative, and for us to understand what's really going on in the world today, we have to let go of, or at least recognize, our belief in American exceptionalism. Because as long as we're stuck here, we won't see reality, in my opinion. We won't allow ourselves. The human brain is very good at fooling us. It's a protective mechanism. We won't go there in this video, but to see the world as it actually is, we have to recognize our filter through this belief in American exceptionalism. So let's keep going. So anyway, as I see it, we're in a state of great flux, great change right now. People talk about the fourth turning. We're in the crisis phase of the fourth turning at this point. The World Economic Forum talks about their 2030 reset. That's another way of looking at what's currently going on from the global perspective. And so anyway, I see that we have basically three choices as Westerners in regards to the changes that are occurring in the world right now. Now, the first is, and this is what I'd like to see, is that we accept reality with grace and maturity, and we work to discover our role in the fair world order. Where do we fit in this new world that is quickly unfolding itself? With our current crop of leaders, this seems very unlikely. We don't have any leaders in the West right now that appear to or act as if they have grasp on reality. They're embedded, deeply embedded in their American exceptionalism, Western exceptionalism. In my opinion, they're not accepting that the world is changing, has changed, and that we need to adopt to the new world. Now, the second choice is we can rage against reality like petulant children. beat our hands and fists on the floor and scream and yell, etc. And what that will lead to is that basically we decline, economically, industrial leadership of the world, our place in the world. Basically, we decline for the next several decades. And we've seen this happen in the UK, Britain. They were the world power. They fought the world changing when, as the United States took over the role of world leader. Britain tried to fight that, and basically they had a slow decline for several decades. They are still in the midst of that decline. And then the third option, and this is the route that I hope we don't go down, although there are any number of things we could point at that suggest that this is the path we're currently on. Basically, that we fight reality, we fight the New World Order, and we try to force the world, planet Earth, to meet our expectations, and I would say unrealistic expectations. And the likely outcome of that option, path number 3, is that we end up destroying the world and all of its inhabitants. Well, me personally, as one of the inhabitants of planet Earth, I don't want to see this happen, I'd like to live for another 40, 50, 60 years, I've got kids. They want to have kids. I'd like to see that the human race has a future on planet Earth. But anyway, so now let's shift from Brian babbling about what he sees as the big picture and American exceptionalism. Let's talk about how the West controls price of gold. Well, it's through the LBMA, that's the London Bullion Market Association, I believe, and then the COMEX, that's the New York-based organization. Gold futures trade on the COMEX. They have a large inventory of physical silver and gold. So these are the two primary mechanisms through which the West controls, manages, manipulates, whatever word you want to use, the price of gold and of course silver as well. So now let's talk about the emerging world order, the multipolar world, the fair world order. That's the term that I actually like, is the fair world order. Are there organizations or entities that are comparable to the LBMA and the COMEX? Well, yeah, sure enough. We've got the Moscow Exchange in Russia. They started trading gold futures in July of this year. And so that's, we've got gold futures on the COMEX. We've got gold futures on the Moscow Exchange. The Moscow Exchange has a specific objective of replacing, or perhaps this is Putin's objective, replacing the LBMA and COMEX as a price control on gold and the precious metals. And again, this is one where we have to let go of our idea of being exceptional somehow, that America rules the world, and accepting that, well, maybe that's not the case. The rest of the world is developing mechanisms and organizations to replace, to bypass Western control. Russia and China don't like the fact that the LBMA and COMEX control the price of not only gold and silver, but most commodities. And so they are actively working to replace those control mechanisms with their own organizations. And so the Moscow Exchange, that's in Russia. And then we have the Shanghai Gold Exchange in China, obviously, where you can trade yuan or renminbi, however you want to talk about the Chinese currency, for physical gold. And so let's continue. Evolving as part of the new, the financial system, the economy in the fair world order, the rest of the world, is the petro yuan. And so basically, the petro yuan is developing as a competitor to the petrodollar. And of course, the petrodollar, that's the standard that we've been on since 1974, when Saudi Arabia agreed to only sell oil in the US dollar. And that forced all countries, any country that wanted to use oil, which of course that's basically all countries, unless you're Amish, I guess, if they wanted to use oil, they had to first go find US dollars. And so it created demand for US dollars from anybody that wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia or any of the other oil producers, oil exporters. And so now what is becoming reality, and this is already occurring, these are the countries that are currently trading oil in contracts which are denominated in the yuan. And so again, this is where I want to encourage us as Westerners, Americans, to understand that it's not just that the world is changing, the world has already changed. What's this? We've got Russia, India, Iran, Venezuela, and parts of Africa. They are already exporting oil and exchanging it for the yuan. This isn't future, maybe someday. This is already happening. And so again, that may be challenging to accept. And belief in the petrodollar, that, Saudi Arabia is only selling oil in the petrodollar. Well, no, that ain't the case anymore. Oil is being traded in the yuan. And I think that Saudi Arabia and India recently agreed to trade oil for the Indian rupee. And so anyway, the point is the world is evolving beyond Western control. And if we remain stuck in the idea, the belief in American exceptionalism, we're going to be left behind. It was just simply the world's going to move on without us. At some point, we're going to have to play catch up. It's like, oh shit, where'd the world go? They're not playing the American exceptionalism game anymore, and I got left behind. But so anyway, and then on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, well, once you have yuan, you can go trade it for physical gold. So now, doesn't it follow that if I have an oil contract which is denominated in the yuan, basically I'm going to get paid for oil in Chinese yuan, well, I can take that currency, the Chinese currency, to the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and I can walk away with physical gold. Well, of course, that's exactly what it means. And so, as part of the current, again, this is not future, this is current, today. We can do this today. Oil is being traded in the Chinese currency, and that currency is directly exchangeable for physical gold. And so this sets the framework, the background for the petro yuan, which is competing. It's a new competitor for the petrodollar. And so I'm just trying to emphasize, folks, that not only the world is changing, the world has already changed. And we need to recognize that. And so let's move on to these three recent events, which I see as significant, and they support my theme for this video, that the world has changed, is changing. The first, obviously, Niger coup. That's Niger, is country in West Africa. That was in July of 26. They overthrew the current rulers of Niger, and replaced it with I believe they're military leaders. So July 26, we're at September 14. So that's, what is that, 6 weeks? Almost 7 weeks ago that occurred. And well, we'll get into the details, but just keep in mind that was 7 weeks ago. Then we had the BRICS summit in late August, and then the G20 summit, which just occurred, that was last week. Now let's dig into the details, the significant details of those three events. So the Niger coup, what this is showing, and of course Niger is, I think it's the fifth African country which has experienced a coup in the last 2 years, maybe just in the last 12 months. But I believe it's the fifth country to experience a change of leadership. As basically, as I see it, it's the African people standing up and saying, look, we're done with Western colonialism. In the case of Niger, it was France. So France got control of Niger and has controlled them for decades. So booted out the existing leaders, have told the French ambassador to leave the country. The ambassador, last I saw, refused to do so, and so Niger cut off water and power to the French embassy. And so I assume that that's still the current status, is that the French ambassador is still in Niger, but he doesn't have any power or water. So I'm guessing that it's dark and stinky in the French embassy, but we don't want to go there. That's kind of gross. So for weeks after this coup occurred, the West, America and France, was saying, well, we're going to send ECOWAS in to restore the quote-unquote legitimate leaders of Niger. And of course, they're Western puppets of that. Those are the leaders that got overthrown were Western puppets. Now, ECOWAS has not done this. Basically, what France, the West, is trying to do here is sick one African country on another African country. And I suspect that the ECOWAS, they're saying, well, do we really want to go kill our African brothers? Because the ECOWAS, these are Western Africans. Niger is made up of Western Africans. There's some deep tribal brotherhood and common ancestry. They're all Africans. It was the West that went into Africa and arbitrarily drew country lines. This is Niger, that's Nigeria, here's Algeria, South Africa, etc. And so anyway, here we are 7 weeks out from this coup, and ECOWAS has not gone into Niger to restore the Western puppets as leaders. And so the farther we get out from the coup, the less likely that is to occur. France doesn't have the military power to go in and do it themselves. And if they did so, it'd be obvious to the world that, basically this was the West still enforcing Western colonialism on Africa, and so that would be a bad image. And so anyway, I suspect, my opinion, this is a done deal. France is no longer in control of Niger. But let's keep moving here. So at the BRICS summit in late August, BRICS added 6 new members, Saudi Arabia being the most significant of those 6 members, and significant because of the petrodollar. So again, Saudi Arabia is key to the petrodollar, and they are already selling their oil in currencies other than the US dollar. So the petrodollar is already, there's a chink in its armor that Saudi Arabia is no longer fully on board with the idea of the petrodollar. They're not going to enforce that petrodollar fully, 100%. And we've seen that already. Joe Biden went to Saudi Arabia recently and he said, hey, could you please produce more oil? We need to keep the price of oil down. We got an inflation issue to deal with. And hey, we got an election coming up and I want to get reelected. Well, not only did Saudi Arabia not go along with that idea, they actually reduced production, not increased. They reduced production, and then recently, just in the last week or so, they extended that reduction of output. So they fully, based on indications, they intend to support higher oil prices going forward. And we'll look at both inflation and the price of oil here in the charts we're about to get to. And then notice as well that Macron, he wanted to attend the BRICS summit and was not allowed to. So that's another indication that the fair world order, the rest of the world, is moving away from Western control. They wouldn't even let Macron attend the BRICS summit as basically a participant, or not a participant, as a viewer, a spectator. There you go. That's the word I was fishing for, a spectator. They wouldn't even allow Macron to attend as a spectator. So, and then the third event was last week, the G20 summit. And so Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, was not invited to attend. And remember that for most of last year, Zelensky was the international rock star. He was invited to everything. He was the star, the international rock star at all of these events where in the past we would have said, what the hell is that guy doing at that event? Because he doesn't belong. He's not a member of the G20. He's not a member of the EU. He's not a member of anything. He's the leader of a sovereign nation. Yeah, okay. But he doesn't belong in any of these organizations where he was showing up as an attendee. And so anyway, not invited to the G20 summit. And of course, he was pouting about that, petulant child. And then one of the interesting things that occurred at the summit, Modi, the premier, I believe is his title, the leader of India, his placard, his nameplate that was in front of him on the summit table showed Bharat as the name of the country that he represented instead of India. And so there's been some speculation, numerous articles written about, okay, why did Modi choose to have Bharat as his country name instead of India, which, this is that's what has occurred in the past, is that his name placard would have said India, not Bharat. And so the speculation is that this is India moving away from, again, Western colonialism. And so remember, Britain colonized India, and that didn't go very well for either India or Britain. And it's a thing of the past at this point. And so anyway, speculation that this nameplate is India moving away from Western colonialism the same way that Africa is. Another, this is tangential, this is not from the G20 summit, but last year, Turkey renamed itself or went back to its traditional country name. And that's the spelling of it. I'm going to try to pronounce it. Turkiya, I believe, is how you pronounce that. Turkiya instead of Turkey. And so anyway, another indication that the rest of the world is moving away from the West. So we've got both India and Turkey potentially changing the name that they want to be called back to their traditional non-Western names. The G20 summit, the G20, the statement that came out of the summit, they wrangle every year over the language of this statement. And so last year, it was the war against Ukraine. Everybody was on board. It's like, Russia is picking on Ukraine, unprovoked attack, blah, blah, blah. And so this year, again, the West, this was the language. They were hoping, United States in particular, was hoping to come away from the G20 with a statement that made it clear that Russia was in a war of aggression against Ukraine, and all they got was the war in Ukraine. And, against versus in, that may seem trivial, but it's not. It's basically to get a G20 statement that everybody could agree on and sign, they had to change this verbiage to now they're just talking about the war in Ukraine without implying, against is this implicit idea that Russia unprovoked attack, etc. And then the second indication in the statement that things are changing, the world is changing, America, the West, wanted the statement to be clearer in reference to grain, that the grain was coming from Ukraine. So remember that Russia recently ended the grain deal, and in recent weeks have been blowing up grain exporting facilities in Ukraine to make it clear to the rest of the world to say, look, we ain't playing this grain export anymore. That deal is done. Until the West meets Russian requirements to continue that agreement, it's over, it's done. And so anyway, the statement that came out of the G20 is grain from Russia and Ukraine, basically acknowledging that the grain exports at this point are coming from both countries. And Russia recently, actually after they ended the grain agreement, they offered to export for free grain to the countries that really needed grain. The countries that economically, if they didn't have grain from somewhere, their people were going to starve. Russia offered to provide them with grain for free. And so anyway, this wording of the G20 statement is another indication that the world is moving away from the West and the narrative that they would like to portray or maintain about the current conflict in this country. So, and then another significant event at the G20 summit was the African Union becoming a permanent member of the G20. So I guess at this point we'd actually talk about the G21 and recognize that the African Union is actually made up of 55 African nations. So when we talk about the African Union, we're actually talking about 55 countries on the African continent. So obviously that is a significant change in the world order, where the G20 is now allowing as a permanent member 55 African nations. So let's see, one more slide. So this is basically a recap of everything that I've talked about in the last 40 minutes. That the Western control of the gold price is fading. This is good news for fans of honest money. And I admit I fully claim my status as a gold bug. I'm a strong advocate for gold as money. And I want to reiterate the idea, basically what I've been trying to cover for the last 40 minutes, is that as Westerners, Americans, some of the current events in the world may be hard for us to accept because we have been inculcated from birth with this idea that somehow we are exceptional. And so believing that the world is changing, and as the world changes, the price of gold will change. Gold will take its natural role, its new role within the new world order. That may be hard for us to believe. And so I wanted to set that as a stage before we go look at the charts of gold. And of course, at this point, I've already been talking for 40 minutes. That's plenty long for one video. So I'm gonna stop here, and then I'll do a part 2. I'll follow up with the charts, and so we'll jump right into the charts in part 2. I hope I've provided some value here. Something I've been pondering, and if you chime in the comments below this video, I'd appreciate it. Do you want to see my face? I mean, you know, I got a pretty face, you know, just ask my mom. She'll tell you, yeah, he's a good-looking kid. I don't see looking at my face as being valuable. The information that I want to portray is in these slides and in the charts that I share with you. But, you know, if I get feedback that people want to see my face, I don't have a problem doing that going forward. So anyway, I will talk to you in the next video.